Hello and welcome to another episode of Sum It Up. I'm Joelle Martinez, joined again by my friend and colleague Harry Hollines. And we were just talking off camera about the fact that this is completely unscripted, but an entirely important conversation to have. And that is climbing without a map, navigating leadership as the first and the only. And I know many of us joining today have had these experiences, being the first in your family to go to college, being the first to walk in and take a seat at the boardroom, being the first to open and launch a business. Maybe you were the first to buy a home or generate wealth. Maybe you've been the only voice in the room and you've carried that burden and opportunity with you in all these spaces and places. No map, no precedent. What does navigating that journey actually look like? I know I felt that weight. I've carried the silence that comes sometimes when we exceed others' expectations, when we step into spaces where they don't expect us to be. And we want to have an open and honest conversation about what it's like, how we survive it, how we cope, and how we actually leverage those instances to turn real opportunities into real impact for community. And I can't imagine a better person to have this conversation with than Harry, because Harry, you have broken so many ceilings. You've stepped into spaces and places that most of us, quite honestly, still to this day, probably can't imagine ourselves being in. And I know you've shared a lot of similar experience because we've talked about it over the years. So welcome. And I want you to open us up today with an experience or the experience when you realized you were the first, the only, and probably navigating a situation without a roadmap.
Yeah, this is first of all, it's awesome to do this again with you, Joelle. It's one of those topics you said where you don't even have to write notes because it's your life, and on the one hand, it's a little upsetting. The fact that it's a topic means that there's not a lot of us in these rooms. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be a topic. But because of that, it's such an important one to talk about. Um, you know, for me, kind of the context, and I know we've talked about it in previous, and obviously you know my professional background, and it's been kind of in the mid cap space, a lot in tech. I've held a lot of C-suite positions, leading mergers, acquisitions, corporate development. So for me, the visual was easy. You look in the boardroom, you look on executive teams, and they don't look like us. They don't look like me. They are predominantly white, and they're predominantly white men to this day, and that's just a fact. You can pull it up, go to any company website, pull up the executive team, and that's just reality. So I had to kind of learn how to navigate through that, knowing that would be reality. And I can tell you, it's hard and it's lonely. I know you're going to talk about it, and it's mentally taxing because you're making me go back through it. I was in those positions for about 23 years, and I literally was writing down. I think I've been in about 320 plus board level meetings over that, and no one looked like me that entire 23-year journey. I was the only one that only looked like me and came from where I came from in that room. And it is hard. And I think if we're going to be really, really honest, I know you're going to do the same, is you have to build your coping mechanisms. And this is probably the hardest thing to admit. For me, I actually had to learn how to assimilate. Otherwise, I wasn't going to survive. So I had to think about everything I was going to do and that I was going to say, and think about how it was going to be interpreted and accepted by the majority. And the majority in that boardroom were going to be white men, not from where I'm from, not understanding me. I had to adjust to them. They did not have to adjust to me. And that was kind of a really, really hard thing to do. And so what I tried to do, since I didn't have a visual and I couldn't point to a lot of pointers that people look like me at that level, I built a blueprint for success that was not visual because I couldn't do that. I built a blueprint based on my performance and my skill set. And I know one response is, well, it should always be that. Well, no, it's not that simple. I knew I had to build a skill set that was 2 or 3x better than everyone else in that room, because that is the reality. I was going to have to be judged. So I was going to have to be better than everyone in that room, or I wasn't going to be there. And that's kind of the reality that I came up with, because I had to overcome those hurdles. I was going to have to be double or triple better than everyone. I have to be double or triple prepared, and I had to make double or triple less mistakes than everyone else. It was not a level playing field. And that's kind of how I built my approach and kind of my coping mechanisms. But it is a tough one. And as I went through that and thinking about this, launching this back at you, you have the double whammy. So we have to be honest about that. I dealt with it as a man of color, but I was a man, and most of those rooms were, men in that room. You had to deal with it and continue to deal with it as a Latina and as a woman. And those are so you have another massive hurdle I don't have to deal with. So I want to hear your experience, your roadmap, because it's tougher than mine. And I acknowledge that.
Wow. Before I answer, I just got to take a moment and process everything you just said. 23 years in boardrooms, 300 plus meetings, and no one looked like you. And that is not okay. And coping mechanisms that are perpetuated where we are assimilating ourselves to survive in those moments limits our ability to thrive in those moments, in my opinion, when we don't get to bring our full selves to the table. But the reality of that experience is so stark. And it's bringing up a lot for me, Harry. And I shared this offline, that in talking about these experiences, I was jotting down and I didn't know which ones I was going to share. And it was heavy to capture my experiences in leadership positions, carrying kind of this role as both a woman, a Latina, and I would add a mother, because that's a whole other layer when you are operating in those spaces. And it's heavy. And I just want to honor that as people are listening to us and understanding that we understand that these experiences have an impact, which we're going to talk about. But hearing your story and your perspective brought one specific instance up with me where I realized that while I had arrived to a position of power and influence by serving on a very prominent board, I was not prepared and I was not given a roadmap for success. I was recruited for a very, very prominent board by the CEO. I went to a mentor, a sponsor, for guidance and help and support and backup that I was qualified for it, because of course that self-doubt plays into whether or not we put ourselves into those positions in the first place. And I went through the interview process, was selected and elected to the board. And to be honest, I did belong there. And I did really well in my first few months on the board, and was always prepared, as my mentor had told me, read those financials inside and out, know the agenda, be ready with talking points, be prepared. That preparedness, that 2 times preparedness, was definitely driven into me by my mentor. But then came the board retreat. And you got to know that this was my first, kind of board experience at that level. And the previous board retreats I had were just extended board meetings with maybe Panera catered for lunch, nothing extravagant. Well, I show up to this board retreat in this amazing place. The one advice my mentor gave me was dress comfortably, because they're long days. And so I show up in a pair of jeans and a sweater and sneakers, so underdressed in the lobby. I really was, from the get-go, it was those mental roadblocks we have to say, I don't belong here, even though I'd been on the board for several months. And then no one told me that there's cocktail hour. And so I show up to the welcome reception, which is really a fancy cocktail hour, dressed completely underdressed. And then the next day, I didn't understand why the board meeting started at noon. And I was up in my room being prepared. And what I learned when I stepped into the actual board conference room is that all of the other board members had been out golfing or taking 10-mile bike rides, or there was a running club. And I was not a part of any of that. I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know that you could take family members and that their spouses and kids were at the pool. Well, we were in the boardroom working. So then the mom guilt, sets in. I shared this story because this is what I understood in that moment, that power and influence isn't just about being prepared, the 2 times preparedness that you're talking about, particularly when you're a woman, a Latina, and a mother, because so much of that power is cultivated, harnessed, captured, protected, and shared because of relationships. And many of these board members have known each other for years. Their kids go to school together. They serve on other boards together. They golf together. And it explains so much of the dynamic in the previous board meetings where they all seem to get one another. And even when I would chime in, there was a disconnect. Yeah. And I realized that because the mentor that I had happened to be a white male, a big supporter of mine, he never experienced that. So he didn't prepare me for that. He didn't tell me I needed to go and build relationships and that is how you have influence on a board. And I think that was really the first time that despite my preparedness from a business standpoint, from a fiduciary standpoint on a board, I was ill prepared to actually navigate power structures. No one ever taught me how to be powerful through relationships. And I've actually put that to work over the years at the LLI in a program we used to do, Insight to Inclusive Leadership, because so many people want diversity, they want, inclusion, but they don't understand the journey to achieve that because they have blind spots around things like affinity and affinity bias, and that it plays such a prominent role in those spaces and places. And I have felt that as a woman, as a Latina, as a mom, my lived experience is so different than most of those that have power. And so we have to put in a lot more work to be accepted, to build trust, to have relationships. So for me, I recognize that if I was ever going to have trust and respect from my colleagues on that board, I was going to have to put in a lot of effort to build relationship. So I spent a year having coffees, attending teas, and other things I probably otherwise would not have done, because that is how the power dynamic works in those spaces. And no one ever told me that.
That is hard. That is hard to, that's hard to hear. I said on some levels I can relate to that. It's even a deeper level because I have seen the dynamic, the gender dynamic alone. I've seen it. I've even seen it at that level where a senior executive as a woman makes a comment and then male makes the same thing. And it's like he originated the idea. Like you see these dynamics really at place. The thing that hit me and what you just said, Joelle, and I've always said has been missing. I've had it sometimes, but this is where allyship really, really matters. And you will hope that your colleagues that come from different places, that's the beauty of diversity, right, would recognize what that room looks like and would open the door and invite you to things. Sometimes it happens. It doesn't happen enough. But when people ask what allyship is when the person should have said, Joelle, we're going golfing tomorrow. Do you want to golf? Are you interested in golf? Right. That's a component to this also, that it can't be done alone in a silo. We figure out how to survive, but to thrive, it's got to be open to everyone. So survival is one thing, thriving is another.
Yeah, I know it won't surprise you. Allyship is so important that after my experience, I actually went to the CEO and the governance. So I put myself on the governance committee because the governance was responsible for not only recruiting and diversifying the board, but onboarding. And by the next board retreat, we had board buddies established to where an existing board member would take on a new board member and navigate that space, not assume that we know. I don't think anyone excluded me. I don't think that they were trying to make me feel as though I didn't belong. I do enough of that internally myself with all the self-doubt, which I know we need to talk about. But it's just blind spots because they're so used to operating in a certain way, and they just don't understand that my lived experience or my experience or lack thereof in general is so different and does not create a level playing field. And then it makes it fun. It makes it more inclusive. But again, I think that's why our work over the years about really expanding the understanding about what that inclusion and belonging actually takes to create has been a really valuable one, and maybe somewhat cathartic. But I want to talk a little bit about self-doubt and about things like imposter syndrome and imposterization. And I want to thank everyone for putting up their experiences and comments here too, because you cannot have that kind of experience, the one that you've had or I have, and not have some stuff in your invisible backpack that you're carrying around. So what is, what has been some of that self-doubt, that imposter, like very specific that you can think of where you were like, yeah, I actually don't believe I belong here, or I'm not good enough, or they've made a mistake. Talk to us a little bit about that. And then how the heck do you get over that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's complicated. There's no perfect roadmap. I would say, for me, it was kind of two parts. One was I had to create an alter ego of myself, and then the other piece of it was just a learning experience. And I'm on kind of the experience side of it. With every kind of C-suite position I had, and there's this great quote, and I'm not going to be able to think about it, but President Obama made this quote about his ascension up from, Harvard to senator to president. But I kind of learned from experience being in that room that there's a lot of smart people in there. There's a lot of not so smart people in there. And there's actually very few just extraordinarily brilliant people in there. The difference was a lot of people expected to be there because they had roadmaps. They had people in their family, they had their parents. So they kind of expected to be there. And a lot of times we don't have that. And so that's something you kind of have to kind of get over. And I'll be honest, I say that I don't want this to be taken wrong. When I created my alter ego, I actually created it to say, I'm actually better than everyone in this room. And I sincerely believe that. And I would take it down to the level, I would say, I'm in the same room as you, and I had way more challenges and roadblocks than you did. So if I got here with that, I think I'm actually better prepared than you. And then I would go to a deep spiritual level, and I'd say, you know what, my DNA is strong. I come from a people that survived slavery. They endured and they always move forward. And like, I would dig that deep spiritually to say my DNA, and we come from powerful indigenous people from around the world. My DNA is powerful in my blood. So I got to kind of figure out how to kind of pull that up. And that was kind of part of how I kind of created this other person that could survive in there. And then we always talk about, I always talk about kind of my sports because it was such a big part of my life.
Yeah.
The self-doubt thing. That's why, and I know your kids I think everyone should do sports, not for what sports is, because sports teaches you early to have to deal with self-doubt, to have to deal with winning and losing, to have to deal with expectations and pressure. And what better time to do it than when you're young? It doesn't matter kind of what the results about it, but through that, you kind of learn mechanisms to deal with the self-doubt. And sometimes, for me, it was, how do you put blinders on? And that's how athletes do it a lot, right? You go on the road and you come out of the tunnel and there's 20,000 fans, rooting for your opposition. You got to block out that. You got to get laser focused, block everyone out. And you'll hear athletes say, I couldn't even hear the crowd. That's part of how they're dealing with the situation and self-doubt. That's that kind of that blinder. I learned to block everyone out. So for me, it was like that combination of both of those. But what about you? I only paused because I keep coming back to, you have these two just overwhelming, and I'm pausing because I've seen it. And even when we're getting ready for this, I'm like, this overlap of Latina and then the gender piece is just, because so many times I could rest on a guy to guy talk. Like, we're just keeping this honest, right? And they talk about guys talk. That happens a lot. It's real. We know it's real. You had to deal with that piece also. So what was that journey like for you?
Gosh, you put on some really thick armor. I'll tell you that. This notion of an alter ego and mechanisms and how we actually navigate. This is really an important point I want to highlight, because you almost do have to have this alter ego, and maybe mine is not as strong and sophisticated as yours. I don't know that I could say I truly believe that I'm the smartest in the room. I have a lot of work to do in that space, but I have an alter ego too, one that has really thick skin and can talk sports with the best of them. And one advantage that I had is that I have a lot of guy friends, and I grew up, feeling very comfortable and could probably pull out more sports statistics than most men. And so I can navigate those spaces, but it is real, the amount of times that you get asked, to go have a drink after everyone is done and no one else is getting that. And, where you're trying to pitch a big idea and, they tell you, well, that's a nice thought, but don't you think it's a little ambitious? Or whether you're told, like, don't you feel guilty? You're here and not with your kids. And they're not saying that to the other men in the room who have children. The double standard is real. I remember one time I was leading a very important negotiation meeting with very important individuals that had significant consequences for an international event. And it was my meeting and I prepared. And I remember being asked if there was coffee and if I could go grab coffee. So those things are perfect examples of what and I haven't coined this phrase, but it's imposterization. We do suffer. Imposter syndrome is real. Self-doubt, lack of confidence, feeling like we don't belong. That psychological experience is so real. And it's really hard to overcome. And that self-doubt perpetuates itself. It's like a seed that just grows into a weed, and it's nearly impossible to get rid of. And I remember one time I was serving on a board with a CEO of a financial institution, and part of the strategy of building relationships, I asked him for a one-on-one meeting. And, lo and behold, we find out we live in the same area, in the same neighborhood. His daughter was going to the university that I went to. And the meeting was so great, Harry. I mean, I really felt like a peer. I really felt respected. I really felt like I belonged, and I was building this very strong relationship with a former colleague, a board member. And he enjoyed it so much, he wanted to ride down in the elevator with me. And before the elevator could close, he looked at me and he said, "Wow, your English is amazing. It's flawless."
Oh,
Harry, I went from the penthouse to the ground floor in a nanosecond, because those reminders, right, that we're different, that they see us through a different lens, even if we had all of these things in common, I was still different, and he still put a filter on there. And so that is that's an example of this imposterization, that we could try as we might to remove the self-doubt, remove that. And then there's going to be these instances, sometimes microaggressions, sometimes actual aggressions that try to put you in your place. And so while you've built this alter ego, I built a value vault. And what I mean by the value vault is that when I encounter moments like that of self-doubt and really feeling pretty terrible, I went in my car and I think I cried, if I'm being honest, because I was so high to so low so quickly. But I got to go to my vault. And sometimes my vault is a friend and a colleague and a peer, where I could say, please tell me I have value. Please tell me I'm worthy. Please tell me my idea isn't just a nice idea, but a really brilliant one. Sometimes I have to write it down. I really kicked butt today in this meeting, or I was the most prepared, and I found the ability to build a better financial revenue model for them, or something along those lines. So I have to build up this vault of value to remind myself of the value that I bring, so I can counter that imposterization that I do face. And I think we all face, but I definitely think women and women of color face 2 times.
Let me, what, Joe, that's just you. Probably I have to ask you, coming off of that, is I've been in some big rooms, but you've been in some major rooms, like, I don't know, the White House. Like, I don't know if rooms get any bigger than that. So just so we're clear, you've been in some major rooms. But on your journey, how have you been able to balance being your authentic self and yeah, being visible and being authentic. And has it been a rebalancing over time? Have you been able to get more comfortable being yourself, and how and why and how did you get there? But I'd love to kind of figure out how do you balance it to where you are now? Do you get to be much more yourself than you were 10 years ago, and how?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's be real, that being yourself and being authentic and being able to bring all of that to the table, you and I are sports people, it is practice and repetition that allows us to actually step into that with confidence. I have to practice a level of authenticity. I have to rehearse it sometimes, especially when I'm in rooms that are really uncomfortable for me. My daughter today, just being totally transparent, I'm not, loving being out there talking about these things so publicly. So I was in front of my mirror, curling my hair, like talking myself up. Like, you got this, you can do this, right? You can be in this space, you could have a voice, you're what you have to say matters. And she walks into my room and she's like, oh, there you go again, telling yourself you have value. So for me, I have gained a level of comfort in my authenticity. I dress the way I want to dress. I talk the way I want to talk. I say what I want to say in a way that I didn't 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that's because I've rehearsed, I've practiced, I feel comfortable with it now, because I have to undo all those patterns of behavior, all the things I was taught around assimilation. I have to undo all of those lessons. I have to rewire through neuroplasticity my brain. That's why we have entire modules on this in our leadership program, because we have to undo what we've been taught. And so it's like sports. I got to keep practicing. I got to keep rehearsing. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to get more comfortable in those spaces the more I actually practice. And it is a practice, because my natural instinct, if I'm being totally honest to you, is stepping into spaces, not calling attention to myself and making everyone feel comfortable with me being there. It takes work and effort for me to say, no, I'm going to be comfortable being in this space. I'm going to be comfortable and share my feelings. And I'm going to be very effective in doing so. And I'm not going to ask for permission to be who I am. And wow, is that, I guess it's progress.
Yes.
I don't know how else to describe it. Wow. It's progress. So I don't know. I mean, you got your ways, you got your magic. If I rehearse, how do you step in? You got this alter ego, but there's times when that alter ego gets poked at. Maybe there's some cracks in it. So what do you do to maintain and to make sure that you are stepping into those spaces with full authenticity?
It's like you said, it's hard. And then I think what's great also, what's awesome about working with you and working for the great team we have at LLI is we all come from different sectors and industries. And I think that's what makes it such a powerful team. I only say that to say, I came from probably the most capitalist part of the system there is. And what I had to learn, and it's just being honest about it, is it's a leverage game. And your authenticity is tied to your leverage. And I'll use the sports analogy, right? LeBron James can get on the podium and say stuff that the 12th person can't say who might get cut tomorrow because of his level of productivity and impact. And inside the boardroom, I would see things like a board member come in jeans and a t-shirt, and you're like, well, that's not appropriate. Oh, well, that's the number one investor, and that person's generated more returns than anyone. It's a leverage game. They have more leverage. Mm-hmm. And so what I kind of learned was I was going to have to figure out, how do I get more leverage? And I had a CEO. I've reported to 7 CEOs, 8. You're number 8. One of my favorite CEOs, and I was middle in my career, said to me, we were walking down the hall, and he said, you should always be interviewing. I went, what? Like, okay, your first reaction is, did I do something wrong? Am I getting ready to get fired? My boss is actually telling me I need to be interviewing. He's like, yes, you should always be interviewing. I expect you to interview with other companies and other positions, even though you work for me. And he said, you should always have an off ramp. and you should always know what your worth is. And if you're producing, then my job is to do the best to try to keep you. But that went into this whole thing about leverage. And so kind of my authenticity started to increase when I realized, one, I belong to be, I deserve to be here. Two, I can get another job somewhere else if this doesn't work out for me. So this isn't like my last choice. And, this is the worst outcome there could be. Kind of let me go, but it would come at a cost now. I'm actually productive. And you realize kind of in the world we're in, and this in our world too, we know around 2.5, 3 years in a position, you start to be productive. You're not the most productive till then. Once you reach that productive piece, there's a cost to letting you go if you're a top producer. Yeah. And that's where I kind of get into this leverage game. And it's I hate to kind of say it that way, but for me, the authenticity and the leverage went hand in hand. As I got more leverage, I felt more confident, a little more bolder, be myself. I started saying a few more things I wouldn't have said 10 years ago, started wearing things I wanted to wear. And as you know, I wear a lot of colorful stuff. I used to wear most just plaid and everything. Now I wear who I am and it starts to come out. So, it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, best advice, this notion about know your value and never accept anything less is something, if you hear my keynotes, I say that so often because we do have to be reminded. And actually it goes back to the value vault. You got to actually know your value. Then you have to believe in it. And then you have to be willing to accept nothing less. And that includes knowing when to walk away and when this isn't the right fit and where you're not being valued. But we can't skip to the third one of accepting nothing less if we don't know what our value is and if we don't actually believe in it. And I have found through 11 years of this work at the Institute and working with Harry, and this because our network, like the bomb people, like these people are extraordinary, but it really stops me in my tracks when I see them not even getting past step one of really knowing the value that they bring, the value that they have, and why they should be appreciated for that value. So that's my piece of advice for folks that are listening today and navigating this world of being in those spaces is, number one, you belong there. We belong there. We bring value to those spaces and places. We have to know what that is. We have to leverage it, as Harry said, right? Sometimes we have to rehearse the narrative in our head so we actually believe it, and then we got to put it to work. And one of my favorite mentors, Catherine Archuleta, told me this. When we get there, we have to give our power away because it comes back multiple times. And I think that's the other important lesson about being the first and the only and navigating without a roadmap to what you said earlier is we have to be someone else's ally. We have to be someone else's sponsor. We have to make sure that where we hold space, Harry, that we're never going to allow 23 years to go by and you be the only one in that room. The whole work that we have been doing for 11 years is to ensure that that is not the reality anymore. But this conversation reminds us about how deep the work actually is. This is a mile deep and a mile wide simultaneously. So those are my, key takeaways here to sum it up. But why don't you close us out with your sum it up? How would you sum up today's conversation from your perspective? And what advice and what wisdom would you want others to know?
I think it started with it, honesty, that it is a tough climb and it's hard. I think we're always kind of, honest, but we need to be in these rooms and we need to be in these rooms across all industries and all sectors. And I'd say I'm part of that journey. One thing that we talk about a lot that is an important part of this is you need to be selfish on this climb. And I really mean, I know we use that word because you have to be selfish to actually put yourself in a position to help other people, help open those doors. And I say that because you need to focus on your mental, physical, and spiritual strength yourself, especially on this climb. This is a taxing climb. It's a hard climb. It's a climb we want a lot more of us to make. But you need to carve out your time and make sure that you're focusing on your own health. It's why you run, I run. It's not about the running, but it is about kind of that space, that time, that it's my time, that I can kind of refocus for the day. And on this climb, don't feel bad about saying no. And I think about one thing I've learned, took me too long to learn, was the power of no, because the power of no means you can do a lot more yeses, but we by design want to do everything for everyone all the time, and you just can't. And you do need to prioritize, and you need to be, be comfortable telling people, no, I can't, I'm not available right now. I can't do it right now. I can do it later. So I think those are some kind of the mechanisms. But as we close, as we close this out, I do think that this climb is so much internal about yourself and your confidence, and you have to spend so much time on it. And that's why I do close it about yourself. We are brilliant enough. We are smart enough. We have the makeup for it. We have and need to be in those rooms, but we understand that our journey is not going to be as smooth, and that's okay. But I tell everyone, we're designed for this. Like we're powerful.
You tell me that all the time.
Beings. We are powerful beings. And I always, I'm very spiritual, but I just say, when you think about those that came before us and our ancestors and where we came from, that is actually running through our veins. So it's there. So it's there. And it's just your kind of way of figuring out, how do I pull that out of me? But I know it's running through my blood. So it's there. Go for it. Just take a step. I always say, just take a step. Just take one step, in that right direction, and then let it go.
Wow, Harry, thank you so much. This is why I value not only your friendship, but your partnership and all of this, because you remind me every day that we're more capable than we give ourselves credit for. And we are made for this. It is in our blood. You say that to me all the time. And I'm telling you folks, this is what he tells me when he's not on camera. It's in our blood. And I believe that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for sharing. If you found this valuable today, share it widely afterwards, because we really do want to normalize these types of conversations. And we most importantly want people to know you are not alone on this journey, this climb, this journey to the summit. We are right there with you. And just to make a plug, at the end of the month, we're bringing a very special guest, a friend of mine, an author who just released a book on this very topic about inclusion and performance and what it's going to take, particularly in today's climate. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you again. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time on Summit Up.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.